When my mom texted, "We're skipping your kid's birthday this year, things are tight," I stared at the screen longer than any sane person should, my thumb hovering over the keyboard as if a single wrong tap might detonate the fragile civility between us, and finally typed back the safest, dullest lie. "No problem, Mom, I understand." But the truth sat heavy in my throat like a swallowed stone. She had never once understood anything when it came to me, not my struggles, not my milestones, and certainly not the child she'd always regarded as some extension of my mistakes rather than a person worthy of celebration. Her absence wasn't about money. She'd been posting photos from dinners out, a weekend craft fair, and some new trinket she bought, because it sparked joy. It was about her not wanting to be bothered, not wanting any obligation that didn't fill her with applause or admiration. So I said nothing to her, but something inside me quietly snapped. Not a dramatic break, but a slow, deliberate unwinding of a thread I'd spent decades trying to knot back together. For days I watched from a polite distance as she tried to present herself to the world like the soft-spoken matriarch of a stable family. Her social media timeline filled with inspirational quotes about love and gratitude, pictures of her self-care rituals, and captions about the importance of showing up, each one landing on my nerves like grit under the skin. I remembered birthdays I hadn't had, moments where I'd begged her to notice me, the sound of her keys jingling as she left the house while I stood at the window pretending not to care. I remembered the practiced smile she'd wear at church, the way people praised her as a devoted mother, and how she never corrected them. When my daughter asked, a week before her party, whether Grandma would be there, I told her the simplest version of the truth, that she had other plans. But watching her face dim just slightly, like a lamp turned a notch too low, something inside me sharpened. I didn't want revenge in the fire and blood sense. That kind always felt cheap, temporary. But I did want clarity, exposure, a moment where the truth she'd hidden behind curated politeness finally slipped out in daylight. So I began small. I sent her a cheerful text with the finalized birthday details, not to guilt her but to give her one last chance to change her mind, and when she replied, "Wish I could. Maybe next year," with that nauseating exclamation mark she used whenever she wanted to sound warm instead of honest, I simply screenshotted it and tucked it away like evidence, not intending to use it yet but knowing I would. On the morning of the party, the house filled with the warm chaos of balloons and frosting and kids shouting over each other, my daughter beaming in a crown of construction paper stars, I felt no bitterness. Just a slow settling of the realization that this joy, this messy, loud, imperfect celebration, was something my mother had never created for me. People asked casually whether my mom would arrive later. I smiled politely and said she was busy, and the euphemism tasted like metal. After the guests left and the last cupcake wrapper had been swept away, I sat on the couch scrolling through my mother's newest post. A picture of a cocktail with the caption, "Treat yourself. Life's too short to stress." And something inside me aligned. I crafted a message. Not cruel, not even angry, but precise, measured, designed to draw a clean line instead of another wound. "Thanks again for letting me know you wouldn't come today. She asked for you. I told her you had other priorities. I hope they were worth it." I didn't send it yet. Instead, I imagined the ripple it would cause, the way it would force her to sit with the image of who she was rather than who she pretended to be. That night, when my daughter fell asleep with her new toys scattered like small monuments around her, I took another step. Not a vengeful one, but an intentional shift. I unfollowed my mother's accounts, archived every message, muted her notifications, not to disappear but to create silence, a silence I knew she would notice because attention had always been her oxygen. Emotional revenge, I realized, wasn't about punishing her but removing the stage she performed on. And as I finally typed, "We need to talk soon," and hit send, I felt a calmness settle over me. Not triumph, not malice, just the quiet certainty that this time, she wouldn't be the one deciding what happened next. My mother didn't reply to "We need to talk soon" until nearly midnight, a classic move. Wait long enough to imply control, answer late enough to suggest inconvenience. And when her message finally arrived, it was a clipped, "About what?" As if she had no idea what line she'd crossed or how deeply she'd carved into the skin of our relationship. I stared at those two words, the false innocence dripping off them, and realized she wasn't confused. She was calculating. She'd always preferred to drag conversations into ambiguity, forcing others to explain their pain in painstaking detail so she could dismiss it as overreaction. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I simply responded, "Let's talk tomorrow." The truth was, I didn't want a conversation. I wanted a mirror. I wanted her to see herself without the flattering light she always angled toward her flaws, and I wanted to be the one holding that mirror steady. The next morning, instead of calling her, I posted a single photo from the birthday party. My daughter blowing out candles, her smile wide and genuine, surrounded by friends but missing one very obvious person. The caption was neutral, almost gentle. "Beautiful day. Some people were missed." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. Within an hour, distant relatives began liking it, commenting the usual sugary phrases, and I saw my mother view the story almost immediately. She didn't comment. She never did when she felt cornered. She liked to choose battlegrounds where she could control the angle, and a public space wasn't safe for her curated persona. So I waited, deliberately leaving the silence intact, letting her wonder whether that post had been pointed or innocent. By afternoon she cracked. "Is this about me?" she texted, the facade of confusion slipping into defensiveness. I replied with a simple, "If you think it is, then maybe." It was the first time I'd given her nothing to grab onto, no emotional handle she could twist, and the uncertainty seemed to rattle her. She called, but I let it ring. I knew her patterns too well. Calls were her way of reclaiming authority, of turning the conversation into a performance where she could sigh dramatically, redirect, and eventually make herself the victim. Instead, I texted, "I'm not ready to talk on the phone. We'll text." That alone would drive her up the wall. She hated text because it created a record, something she couldn't reshape later. She responded with a slew of messages. "I don't appreciate being made to feel guilty," followed by, "You know things have been hard, then, why are you being dramatic?" Each one revealed more than she intended. Guilt, deflection, dismissal, her usual trifecta. I typed slowly, carefully. "I'm not making you feel anything. I'm telling you what happened. You weren't there, and your granddaughter noticed." Then I stopped. I didn't elaborate. I didn't soften. I let the truth sit. Hours passed, and for the first time in years, she didn't have a neat response. Instead, she sent, "Well, I guess I can't do anything right," a sentence she'd weaponized my entire childhood to shut down accountability. That line used to make me fold instantly, scrambling to reassure her, but now it only made something inside me turn cold with clarity. "This isn't about doing everything right," I wrote. "It's about showing up when it matters." She didn't reply. Not that night, not the next morning, not even after she saw another post. This one a short video of my daughter opening gifts, laughing loudly, unaware of the invisible tension woven through the day. The story view from my mother lingered at the top like a ghost. On the third day, she finally broke her silence with a message longer than any she'd sent in years. An elaborate speech about her tight finances, how she felt judged, how she didn't think it was a big deal, ending with a predictable accusation. "You're being unfair and hurtful." I read it slowly, seeing through each sentence like a window pane. She wasn't apologizing. She was repositioning herself as the wounded party, expecting me to salve her ego like always. But I didn't. "I'm not hurtful," I replied. "I'm honest. It's new for both of us." And then, almost as an afterthought, I added the sentence I knew she would replay in her mind for days. "I'm protecting my daughter from the patterns I grew up with." It was the emotional equivalent of pulling a pin. Within minutes, she called, 5 times in a row, then again, panic now replacing defensiveness. She knew what that line meant. Distance. Boundaries. A version of me she couldn't manipulate. I answered none of the calls. Instead, I turned my phone face down, made dinner with my daughter, and let the sound of ringing fade into the background like an appliance malfunctioning in another room. By the time I checked again, she had stopped calling and sent a final message. "I think you're making a mistake you'll regret." That was her last, desperate attempt at control. A prediction disguised as concern, meant to hook into my anxiety like a barbed wire. But all it stirred in me was a slow-burning resolve. I typed a short reply, one that didn't give her the emotional fuel she craved. "We'll talk when I'm ready." Not before. And for the first time in my life I felt the balance shift. Not because I wanted power over her, but because I was finally done giving her power over me. For 3 days after I told her we'd talk when I was ready, the silence between us grew thick, almost physical, like humidity before a storm. And though I knew she was stewing, pacing, crafting speeches in her head, I refused to break the quiet. I had learned the hard way that silence was power when used intentionally, not as punishment but as protection. She finally cracked on the 4th morning, sending a message that pretended to be calm. "I'll stop reaching out if that's what you want." It was a trap, of course, the kind designed to corner me into reassuring her, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I simply read it, felt nothing, and put my phone down. That was when the true unraveling began. Mutual relatives started messaging me out of nowhere with vague comments like, "Your mom seems upset, everything okay?" Which told me she had begun her favorite pastime, preemptive reputation defense. She must have been sprinkling half-truths in private conversations, presenting herself as the misunderstood mother trying to mend wounds while her dramatic daughter pushed her away. But I didn't counter it. I didn't rush in to correct narratives or defend my name. I stayed still, letting curiosity bloom in others without giving her a story to hide behind. Meanwhile, I noticed a shift in my daughter. She had stopped asking about grandma and instead started talking more about the people who were in her life. Her teacher who braided her hair during art class, her friend whose dad always brought the best snacks, and it hit me with uncomfortable clarity that children adapt faster than adults. She wasn't mourning the absence my mother had created. She was simply filling the gaps with those who showed up without question. That realization fueled something steady and cold in me. The revenge I was choosing wasn't the dramatic, explosive kind. It was the quiet, accumulative kind that came from living well without a person who expected to be needed. Then one afternoon, as I was picking up toys from the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from her that was unlike the others. Long, frantic, full of unraveling edges. "I don't understand what I'm supposed to have done wrong. I didn't think missing one party would start all this. This is ridiculous. You're pushing me out of your life and making me look bad." The last sentence revealed everything. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the version of herself she projected to everyone else. For the first time in my life, I didn't respond immediately. Brewed tea. I washed dishes. I let the message age. Finally, hours later, I wrote, "If you don't understand, that's the problem. And I'm not making you look bad. I'm just not protecting you from the consequences of your choices anymore." There was no accusation in it, just truth. She didn't reply for the rest of the night. The next morning, I discovered she had taken a new approach. She emailed me a long, overwritten attempt at sounding composed and reasonable, claiming she wished I had spoken sooner, that she would have rearranged things if she'd known it mattered so much, ending with a plea. "Can we please pretend this never happened?" That line nearly made me laugh. Not from humor but from the familiar absurdity of it. For years, that sentence had been her eraser, her reset button. Her way of smoothing over wounds without ever acknowledging them. But I wasn't her child shadow anymore, bending myself into forgiveness just to keep her comfortable. I wrote back one sentence. "No, we can't pretend." Meanwhile, I noticed her online activity shift. Her stories were suddenly filled with passive-aggressive quotes about toxic people, ungrateful children, and setting boundaries with those who disrespect you. It would have once infuriated me. But now it just looked desperate, like someone shouting through a window hoping the neighbors would take their side. My revenge was working, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I was forcing her to face a version of me she couldn't manipulate. And then came the moment I didn't expect, a message from my aunt saying, "Your mom is worried she's losing you." I stared at it, realizing how ironic it was. She was only afraid of losing something when she no longer controlled the timeline. I typed back honestly, "She's not losing me. She's losing the version of me that tolerated everything." For the first time, writing that felt like reclaiming oxygen. That evening, she finally reached out again, this time with a different tone, deflated, almost human. "Can we talk? Not to fight. Just to understand." It was the closest thing to vulnerability she had ever offered. And I sat there, phone in hand, weighing the request. Because emotional revenge isn't about shutting someone out. It's about shifting the dynamic until they're forced to confront who they truly are. I replied, we can talk. But not to fix what you think is broken. To name what actually is. As I hit send, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The calm of someone who no longer fears the fallout, because the earthquake has already happened and I'm standing in what remains, stronger for having survived the first impact. I didn't know how the conversation would go, or if anything meaningful would come of it, but for the first time I was leading it. And the real revenge, the quiet, devastating kind, was this. She knew it too. When she finally called that evening, I let the phone ring twice before answering, not out of spite but because I wanted to breathe, to step into the conversation with a steadiness she couldn't tilt, and when I said hello, she responded with a tentative, almost brittle, "Hi," like someone trying to enter a room without knowing if the floor would hold. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching into something taut and expectant, and I realized she was waiting for me to set the tone. Another habit formed over years of me cushioning every blow, smoothing every edge, but I didn't fill the space for her this time. Eventually she inhaled sharply, the way she did when rehearsing wasn't enough anymore, and said, "I don't understand why you're so angry." That sentence, the one she had practically engraved into my childhood, hit me with the dull familiarity of an old bruise, but instead of collapsing inward like I once would have, I simply said, "I'm not angry. I'm clear." She didn't respond, probably thrown off by how calm I sounded, so I continued, not raising my voice, not trembling, just naming things she had spent decades ignoring. "You didn't come." She noticed. "That's the reality." She exhaled loudly, the frustrated sigh that used to signal I'd crossed into ungrateful territory, but this time I didn't flinch. "I already told you money's been tight," she said, layering her voice with the martyrdom she believed made her sympathetic. "And you know how busy things have been. I can't drop everything." I let her words settle, then asked the question she had never prepared for. "So why did you post pictures from brunch that same day?" Silence again. The kind that reveals guilt without confession. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp, defensive. "I don't owe you explanations for every little thing." "You don't," I agreed. "But you owe honesty if you expect trust." That sentence landed like a stone tossed into still water. I could almost hear her recalibrating, trying to find the angle where she could pivot into victimhood, but every route kept bumping into the same unmoving wall. Me. "I feel like you're punishing me," she said eventually, softer now, leaning into vulnerability like a tactic. "You've been distant, and I don't know how to fix it." And for the first time in my life, I told her the truth she'd always refused to hear. You can't fix something you don't believe is broken. You don't think you did anything wrong. Her breath caught just barely. A tiny sound, but one that exposed the crack beneath her armor. "It was just one birthday," she muttered. "You act like I abandoned her." "It wasn't one birthday," I said gently, and the calmness in my voice surprised even me. "It was every time you didn't show up for me. And now it's her turn to feel what I felt. And I won't let that happen." She went quiet again, and I wondered if she was finally replaying the years she'd edited in her mind. The missed recitals, the cancelled weekends, the emotional absences smoothed over with gifts or excuses. "I didn't know you felt that way," she whispered finally, and the words carried a tremor I couldn't immediately decipher. Fear, embarrassment, or the terrifying possibility that she meant it. I closed my eyes, letting the truth rest between us. "You never asked." She inhaled sharply, and for the first time, the silence between us wasn't combative. It was reflective, heavy with unspoken reckonings. After a long pause, she said, "So what now? What do you want from me?" And that was the question that revealed everything. She thought this was a transaction, a negotiation, a problem she could solve by offering the right apology or self-serving promise. "I don't want anything," I told her. "Not a performance. Not guilt. Not excuses. Just awareness. Just change that you choose. Not change you do because you think it'll get me back." She was breathing harder now, as if the conversation had turned into a steep climb she wasn't conditioned for. "I don't know if I can be what you want," she said. "I've never been good at all this." I almost smiled. Not out of cruelty, but because it was the closest she had ever come to admitting limitation. "I don't need you to be good at anything," I said. "I need you to be honest. With yourself first, then with me." She didn't answer, but I could hear her thinking, really thinking, maybe for the first time in years. Then she said, in a voice stripped of performance, "I don't want to lose you." And strangely, the sentence didn't ignite the old fear or guilt. It made me feel grounded, solid, unshakable. "You won't," I said. "But you might lose the version of me who absorbed everything without speaking." There was a long pause before she whispered, "Maybe that's fair." And there it was. Not closure, not redemption, but the beginning of something unfamiliar. Accountability. When we hung up, she didn't send a follow-up text. No frantic explanations. No passive-aggressive quotes. Just silence. But a different kind, one that felt like soil being turned, not a weapon being sharpened. And as I sat there in the soft lamplight of my living room, listening to the quiet house around me, I realized the real revenge had never been the distance. It was the truth, finally spoken aloud, forcing her to face a reality she'd rewritten for years. And now, for the first time, she was the one who had to decide what she would do with it. In the days after our conversation, I expected her to retreat into the familiar comfort of denial, to rebuild her fortress of excuses and passive-aggressive righteousness, but instead what arrived was an unexpected, unsettling quiet, the kind that didn't feel like avoidance but like someone walking carefully around the edges of their own reflection, unsure what they'd find if they looked too closely. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't try to clean up her image through the usual whisper. Network of relatives. And though part of me braced for the inevitable resurgence of her old behavior, another part sensed a shift. Not transformation, not repentance, just stillness. Meanwhile, life continued in its ordinary rhythm around me. School drop-offs, grocery lists, laundry cycles, but under the surface was a faint, pulsing awareness that something had changed between us in a way that couldn't be undone. One evening, while my daughter colored at the kitchen table, I received a message from my cousin. "Your mom's been quiet. I think she's trying to figure out how to talk to you without messing it up." The idea of her being cautious, actually cautious, felt almost surreal, like watching a wild animal inch toward an open hand. But I didn't respond to my cousin. This was between my mother and me, and I wasn't going to let third parties become emotional couriers anymore. On the fourth evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from her. Not a text, not a missed call, but an email, short enough to be intentional. "I've been thinking a lot. I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to try." There were no justifications attached. No emotional manipulation tucked between lines. And somehow that made it more disarming than any apology she could have given. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I reread it several times, trying to decide what I was supposed to feel. Gratitude. Suspicion. Relief. But the truth was simpler. I felt a cautious curiosity, the kind that keeps you aware of your footing while still being willing to take a step forward. That weekend, I took my daughter to the park, the early sunlight filtering through the trees like soft gold, and while she ran across the grass with her hair flying behind her, I caught myself imagining what it might look like if my mother showed up. Not physically, but emotionally. If she could someday stand beside us without the weight of old wounds pulling us all off balance. The thought didn't sting the way it used to. Instead, it felt like a possibility I didn't have to rush or fear. That night, after I put my daughter to bed, I sat on the couch with the lights low and finally typed a response. Trying is enough for now. But it has to be real. Not performative. Not temporary. I hovered a moment before hitting send, aware that the words weren't a demand but a boundary. Something I had rarely given her without softening. Her reply came the next morning. "I know. And I'm scared I'll do it wrong." Something inside me loosened. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but recognition. She was finally speaking without disguises, without the armor of maternal perfection she had always hidden behind. I wrote back, "Doing it imperfectly is better than pretending you don't need to try." She didn't respond immediately, and I didn't expect her to. Emotional honesty was foreign terrain for her. She was learning to speak a language she'd never been taught. The rest of the day passed quietly until my phone buzzed that evening with a longer message. Measured, hesitant, but honest in a way I hadn't seen from her. I've spent a long time believing I had to be the strong one, even when it meant pretending. I know I hurt you. I see that now. I don't know how to fix the past, but I want to be better for you and for her. If you'll let me. I sat in the dim light, reading those words, and felt a strange mix of ache and relief, like someone pressing a cold cloth to an old burn. She wasn't asking for forgiveness in the way she used to, demanding it as proof of her goodness. She was asking for permission to change. And the most surprising part was that I believed her. Not blindly, not entirely, but enough to let the possibility breathe. We can try, I wrote. But slowly. On new terms. She agreed almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting for the terms to be named. In the weeks that followed, she didn't rush, didn't push, didn't revert to her curated image. Instead, she asked small, genuine questions. How my daughter's week was going, whether I needed anything, not out of obligation or performance but out of curiosity, maybe even care. She didn't overstep or demand access. She simply showed interest without entitlement. It felt unfamiliar, tentative, but real. The real revenge, I realized, wasn't the distance I'd created. It was the shift that forced her to confront the parts of herself she had ignored for decades, the mirror she finally couldn't look away from. And strangely, watching her face herself was more satisfying than any dramatic punishment I could have engineered. One evening, as my daughter curled against me on the couch and drifted to sleep, I thought about the journey we were on. Not toward reconciliation, but toward truth, toward something that might one day resemble a healthier version of family. My mother and I would never have the relationship I once dreamed of, but maybe we could have a different one. One built on boundaries instead of illusions, honesty instead of fear. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was losing anything by trying. It felt like I was reclaiming something I'd thought was gone forever. My voice, my agency, my peace. And if that wasn't revenge, I didn't know what was.